The exile knot did not fall when the Alpha King cut it. It should have dropped into the black pine ashes at Rilla Thane's feet, a dead strip of braided oath cord severed from her wrist before the whole pack. That was the law. That was the mercy. A clean cut. A public shame. One final breath inside pack ground before the gate opened, and the accused walked out with no protection, no fire right, no moon shelter, and no name spoken kindly behind her. But the knot stayed in the air. One end still smoked from the silver knife in Alpha King Dacian Morrow's hand. The other end hung above Rilla's bare wrist, where the cord had been tied since the winter she first swore border service. Between them, the severed braid trembled like something alive deciding where pain belonged. The black pine oath yard went silent. No wolf breathed. Rilla stood on the exile stone, with her hands unbound, because Mireva Holt had wanted the court to see there were no chains on her. Chains made a woman look wronged. Free hands made her look guilty when she did not fight. Around the yard, the pack gathered beneath tall black pines glazed with frost. Warriors lined the outer ring. Elders sat under wolf-hide canopies. Border widows watched from behind them with hollow eyes, told that Rilla Thane had abandoned their families during the northern raids. She had not. That truth sat behind her teeth like blood she refused to spit. Beta consort Mireva Holt stood to Dacian's right in a gown of dark red wool, her pale hair braided with mourning beads she had not earned. She held the missing border record against her breast, as if it was sacred. Only Rilla saw how her fingers kept pressing the lower corner of the parchment. Not the royal seal, not the witness line. The lower corner, where border routes were marked before copies, went to the Oath Archive, the place where protection paths could disappear without the public seeing the cut. Rilla Thane, Mireva said, her voice soft enough to sound sorrowful and sharp enough to skin bone. You were given charge of 12 border families. Only 5 reached the southern shelter. 7 vanished after you broke formation and fled through enemy land. A murmur went through the pack. Rilla looked at the widows, the old fathers, the children standing too still beside the pine roots. She knew every vanished name. She knew which ones had survived. She knew which hollow-eyed mother in the crowd was grieving a daughter who was alive beyond the river, because Rilla had led her there through wolf-thorn ravines, while enemy scouts hunted the marked roads Mireva had sold. Name them, Rilla said. Mireva's lashes lifted. What? The families I abandoned. Name them before the knot is cut. The murmur shifted. Dacian's gaze sharpened. He was not a man people mistook for gentle. Alpha King Dacian Morrow stood taller than every wolf in the yard, his black cloak falling from broad shoulders, his dark hair wind-torn, his jaw hard as winter stone. The scar across his left brow made one eye look colder than the other, though Rilla had once seen that same eye soften over a starving border pup carried into the hall beneath a soldier's coat. That memory hurt now. It made him more than the hand holding the knife. It made him the man who should have asked. He had cut half through the exile knot already. He had done it before, reading the missing roots himself. Mireva recovered quickly. Do not let her turn judgment into theatre, Majesty. The dead do not need their names used as shields by the woman who failed them. I did not ask for the dead, Rilla said. I asked for the missing. Mireva's mouth stilled. There. The smallest crack. Dacian saw it. Rilla knew he did because his grip changed on the silver knife. Not enough for the crowd. Enough for her. Enough to make the silence between them deepen. Why did you never answer the charge in council? Dacian asked. His voice carried across the yard. Low and dangerous. Rilla looked at him. Because the council never summoned me. A ripple passed through the elders. Mireva stepped forward at once. She was summoned 3 times. No, Rilla said. A summons was nailed to the north gate after my fire. Right had already been taken. I was outside Packwoods. I could not cross back without being killed by the boundary. Dacian's face did not change, but something behind his eyes went still. Mireva bowed her head. Majesty, grief makes clever liars. Rilla almost smiled. It would have been ugly if she had. Power makes cleaner ones. A growl rose from the warriors. Dacian lifted one hand. The sound died. Mireva's eyes hardened. She turned toward the pack, not the king, and that was how Rilla knew the next blow had been prepared for witnesses. The accused led children through enemy land without sanction, Mireva said. She broke safe route. She abandoned Crown Road. She returned without the 7 families and refused to surrender her private map. If she claims innocence now, let her show the map. Rilla's hands curled. There was no map anymore. She had burned it before crossing back because the route still protected those who survived. If Mireva wanted it, then Mireva did not know where all of them were. Not yet. That was something. Dacian looked at Rilla. Do you have proof? Rilla held his gaze. Alive people are not proof until a king is willing to name them. The words struck harder than she intended. For one breath, he looked less like the Alpha King and more like a man standing at the edge of a mistake too large to call back. Mireva moved before that breath could become doubt. The law is clear. The elders nodded. The warriors watched. The widows waited for punishment to become comfort. Dacian looked at the Exile Knot, then at Rilla's bare wrist. Something in his jaw tightened. Rilla Thane, by Black Pine law, your pack protection is severed until the missing border debt is answered. He brought the silver knife down. The knot split. Rilla did not flinch. She had survived worse than public exile. She had crossed enemy ravines with a fevered child tied to her back, and 3 wolves tracking her blood through snow. She had given up her own fire right to lead hunted families beyond pack claim, because if she returned with them, Mireva's sold roots would have become a massacre. She had known the pack might hate her. She had not known Dacian would cut before asking where the survivors slept. The severed knot hovered. An exile knot did not prove innocence. It proved unpaid protection. If the cord refused to fall, someone in power had cut shelter away from a life still owed by the pack. A black line opened through its braid. Mireva took one step back. Dacian stared at the cord. The exile knot twisted in the air, then snapped toward his open palm. It struck him like a living coal. Black fire burned across his skin. Dacian's fingers closed around nothing, but the mark spread anyway. Knot lines crawling over his palm, around his wrist, up the strong tendons of his sword hand. The Alpha King's wolf shadow erupted behind him with a furious snarl, then stopped as the mark formed a single word in ember-dark lore. Debt. The yard recoiled. Mireva whispered, Impossible. Rilla looked at Dacian's burning hand, then at the gate beyond the black pines. The exile knot had not cleared her name. Not yet. It had only told the pack that the border debt had not been paid, and that the hand cutting her shelter had touched the debt too. Dacian lifted his marked palm, his face pale with pain, and something worse. Rilla. She stepped down from the exile stone. The pack parted without meaning to. Do not call my name after cutting it from shelter, she said. Then Rilla Thane walked toward the open gate, and every black pine in the oath yard bent away from the Alpha King's burning hand. Behind Mireva, the missing border record began to bleed 7 names into the snow. A widow's boy saw the names before the elders did. He stood near the benches with snow around his bare ankles, too young to understand exile lore, and old enough to know the shape of a name his mother had whispered into winter prayers. The missing border record lay where Mireva Holt had dropped it behind her. Its lower corner darkened, drinking from a wound no blade had opened. 7 names bled downward in narrow red lines. Mother, the boy whispered. That is Aunt Sella. The yard turned. Mireva moved first. She swept her dark red skirts over the parchment, hiding it before the nearest widow could rise. Her face softened into practiced grief. No one touched that record. The exile knot has disturbed oath, ink. It will write whatever guilt wants it to write. Rilla had nearly reached the open gate when she heard the boy. She stopped with 1 foot beyond the black pine threshold. Outside, There was no moon shelter for her, no fire rite, no wolf call that would answer if enemy scouts scented her. The law had opened its mouth behind her, and the wild had opened its mouth ahead. Still, she turned, not all the way back. Enough. The gate wind cut at her cheek like a warning. Pack law had already begun forgetting the shape of her skin. "Read them," Rilla said. Mireva's eyes flashed. "You no longer command in this yard." "I am not commanding." Rilla looked at the widows. "I am asking whether grief is afraid to hear a name." An old woman rose from the second bench, her hands shaking beneath a patched fur mantle. "Move your dress, Beta, consort." Mireva did not move. "This is a legal matter. My daughter is a legal matter." The yard tightened. Dacian Morrow looked from the widow to Mireva's hem, then to the black debt mark burning in his palm. The word debt no longer sat on his skin. It pulsed from beneath it. "Step away from the record," he said. He had cut her knot before asking for names. Now the names had risen from the snow to ask him instead. Mireva turned slowly. "Majesty, the record is contaminated by the exile rite. Then step away before it contaminates your shoes." A thin silence followed. It was not apology to Rilla. It was not trust. But it was the first command Dacian placed against Mireva instead of beside her. Mireva obeyed. The parchment lay exposed in the snow. 7 names bled clearly now. Sellavur, Marenholt, Brinavale, Tomengray, Irrafen, Keltvor, Lumahal. Beside each name, the record wrote what the court had not allowed Rilla to say. Rooted east, wounded, carried, fevered, hidden beyond river, leg broken, moved by night, sheltered in Wolfthorn ravine, scouted false road, marked as dead, breathing when released. No one spoke. The widows stared as if hope had appeared in a form too cruel to touch. A dead loved one could be mourned. A living missing one demanded courage every hour. Dacian's marked hand closed. The debt mark burned brighter at Brina Vale. His house name. Rilla saw it. So did Mireva. The beta consort's grief mask slipped for half a heartbeat. Under it was fear, quick and bright. "A trick," she said. Rilla could have planted those names before the rite. Rilla stepped back inside the gate. The boundary wind hissed against her skin, punishing the crossing. Pain flashed up her spine, but she let the pack see only the tightening of her jaw. Dacian moved toward her before thought could make him careful. The debt mark flared. His wolf shadow surged behind him, black and immense, placing itself between Rilla and the gatewind. The boundary stopped biting at once. Rilla looked at the shadow, then at the Alpha King. Dacian looked as startled as she felt. Mireva struck quickly. "Majesty, do not shield her. The exile has begun. If your wolf covers her, the debt will bind deeper." Rilla stepped away from the shadow. "I did not ask him to cover me." "No," Dacian said, eyes on his own wolf. Shadow. "But the mark did." The words unsettled him. "Good. They should." Rilla knelt beside the bleeding record before any elder could forbid her. She did not touch the names. She pressed 2 fingers into the snow beside them and breathed in. Black pine sap. Othink. And beneath both, faint but unmistakable, road ash from the eastern ravine. "They are alive," she said. The old woman made a broken sound. Rilla lifted her eyes to Dacian. "At least 5 were alive when I released the root. The other 2 were breathing when I left them beyond the river. If these names are bleeding now, the knot is not showing ghosts. It is showing unpaid shelter." Dacian crouched across from her, not close enough to touch. "Where are they?" Rilla's face closed. There it was again. The king asking for the answer, after cutting the woman who carried it. "If I tell you in this yard," she said, "Mireva's sold roots will find them before your riders do." The pack inhaled as one. Mireva went very still. Dacian's gaze lifted to her. "Sold roots?" Rilla stood. Ask why the enemy waited on Crown Road. Ask why the safe shelters were empty. Ask why the only names missing are the ones I moved off the marked path." Mireva laughed softly. "She returns from exile for one breath and already accuses the council that fed her." "No," Rilla said. "I accuse the hand that hid the lower corner of the record." Mireva's fingers twitched. The debt mark on Dacian's palm answered, burning a second word beneath the first. Route. The snow around the parchment blackened into a map no one had inked. It marked the Crown Road first, then crossed it with 7 broken trails leading away from the pack boundary. 4 trails ended beyond the river. 2 vanished in Wolfthorn Ravine. 1 curved toward enemy land and stopped at an old black pine symbol. Mireva whispered. No, Rilla heard her. So did Dacian. The Alpha King rose, his marked palm smoking in the winter air. "Seal the gates. No rider leaves until those roots are read." Mireva turned sharply. "Majesty, if those families are alive, they are outside pack claim. Bringing them back without full council review could invite border war." Rilla looked at her. "That is what you are afraid of? Not dead families, living witnesses." The old woman stepped toward the map. "My daughter is alive." Rilla could not promise what weeks of hiding might have taken, so she gave the only truth she had. "She was alive when I gave up my shelter for hers." The widow began to weep without sound. Dacian looked at Rilla then, and the force in his face changed. Not softened, struck. The kind of struck that came when a man finally understood the shape of the blade he had held. "Rilla," he said. She stepped back before his voice could become another claim. "Do not ask me to return," she said. "Not until the rescued families are named first." The debt mark flared hard enough to drive Dacian to one knee. Black fire poured from his palm into the snow map, racing along the 7 broken trails. At the place where the last trail stopped, the old black pine symbol split open. From beneath the snow came the sound of wolves howling far beyond the border. Not mourning, warning. And then the bleeding record wrote one more line. Mireva Holt sold the Southern Shelter Road before the raid. Then a second line began to bleed beneath it, authorized under the Alpha King's seal. The Alpha King's seal ring cracked before anyone accused him. It did not break to clear him. It cracked because a king's seal could be innocent of intention and still guilty of consequence. Dacian Morrow was still on one knee in the snow, his marked palm smoking over the black map, when the iron ring on his right hand split along its crest. A thin line of black fire crawled through the wolf-head stamp. Not enough to break it. Enough to make every elder look from the bleeding record to the hand that had once pressed law into wax. Mireva Holt moved closer to him, as if loyalty had legs. "Majesty," she said, "do not let a cursed exile turn your own seal against you." Rilla stood near the gate with the boundary wind still cutting faint red lines along her cheek. She did not step farther into the yard. Pack law had already begun forgetting her. The gate knew she was no longer sheltered. And the longer she stood between exile and return, the more the cold tested where protection had been cut away. But she looked at Dacian's cracked ring, then at the record. "Ask when it was sealed," she said. Mireva's eyes narrowed. She would interrogate the crown now. "No," Rilla said. "I would make the crown interrogate itself." The words passed through the yard like a drawn blade. Dacian rose slowly. The debt mark burned from palm to wrist, 2 words now carved into his skin. Debt. Route. His wolf shadow stood behind him, larger than his body. Its black ears flattened toward Mireva, and its muzzle lifted toward the border howls beyond the pines. "Bring the seal ledger," Dacian said. His voice was steady. His hand was not. The ring had cracked on his finger, not Mireva's. Whatever she had done with his seal, the pack had bled beneath his name. Mireva's hand tightened around her sleeve. "The seal ledger is held in the Oath Archive. It cannot be opened during an active exile. The Exile Knot is active because I cut it." A few warriors lowered their eyes. Mireva bowed her head. Majesty, if the seal ledger is opened in public, every border agreement from the past winter becomes vulnerable. She knows that. She wants the pack divided. Rilla laughed once. It had no humor in it. 7 families were sent down a road your enemies already knew, she said. The pack was divided before I ever left the gate. Mireva stepped onto the edge of the snow map, placing one red slipper over the trail that ended in Wolfthorn Ravine. The accused admits she moved families beyond sanctioned routes. That alone is exile-worthy. Whatever else the record writes, she broke formation. Rilla's face hardened. I broke formation because the formation had been sold. Prove it. I kept them alive. That is proof enough for me. Not for Law. Rilla looked at the bleeding names. Law did not carry Rilla Thane through thorn fever. Law did not hold Brina Vale's mouth shut while enemy scouts passed close enough to hear breathing. Law did not crawl under frozen roots with Luma Hal when her wound opened again. The yard went still. One elder whispered, She knows the hidden injuries. Dacian turned to Rilla. You said Brina Vale was hidden beyond the river. Rilla did not answer. Pain moved across his face, sharp and private. Brina Vale. His house name. Another life he had let become accusation before he asked whether it still breathed. Tell me where, he said. Rilla met his eyes. No. The refusal cut through the yard harder than rebellion. You cut my shelter before you asked where theirs was, she said. I will not hand living people back to the same silence that condemned me. The warriors looked away first. Dacian did not. That was worse in its own way. He took the words without defense, and for a breath, Rilla hated that he could learn pain after giving it. Late understanding did not warm the cold places it had made. Mireva smiled. Convenient. Rilla turned on her. Then swear by the Exile Knot that you never sold the Southern Shelter Road. The smile vanished. There it was. Not panic. Not yet. Calculation struck hard enough to show bone. Mireva lifted her chin. I do not answer challenges from the exiled. The knot is on your king's hand, Rilla said. Answer him. Dacian extended his burning palm toward Mireva. The black knot lines shifted, waiting. Swear it, he said. Mireva looked at the mark, then at the cracked seal ring. Her gaze darted not toward the elders, not toward the widows, but toward the black pine symbol, split open at the edge of the snow map. Rilla saw. The symbol was not only a route mark, it was a shelter mark. Old. Hidden. Older than Dacian's reign. Mireva knew it. Dacian followed Rilla's gaze. What is that mark? Rilla's throat tightened. A place pack law does not remember unless a debt wakes it. Namit. No. His jaw hardened. She stepped fully away from the gate, and the boundary wind cut at her again. Dacian's wolf shadow surged, wanting to cover her, but she lifted one hand. Do not, she said. The shadow stopped. Dacian stopped with it. It cost him. The debt mark pulled his wolf toward her, as if protection could be forced through guilt. But Rilla would not return under a beast's instinct. She pointed to the bleeding record. First, the seal ledger. Then the rescued family's names spoken before the pack. Then I decide whether I tell you where they sleep. Mireva snapped. She bargains with lives. No, Rilla said. I learned from you what happens when lives are handed to power without witness. Dacian looked toward the oath archive beneath the oldest pine. Open it. An elder rose too quickly. Majesty, the archive cannot be opened after exile judgment unless 3 council hands agree. Then gather 3. Mireva's fear sharpened into action. She pulled a mourning bead from her braid and crushed it between her fingers. The bead cracked open with a small silver flash. The sound was too small to be a weapon. That made it worse. Weapons warned the living. Signals only told hunters where to run. Far beyond the gate, the warning howls stopped. All at once, Rilla went cold. The 7 broken trails in the snow map began to blur. as if unseen hands were dragging ash across them from the other side of the border. "She just signaled someone," Rilla said, Mireva's face smoothed. "Grief makes you imagine enemies everywhere." "No." Rilla stepped over the first line of the map, ignoring the sting as exile law bit into her feet. "That was a route. Call bead." Dacian turned on Mireva. "Who did you signal?" Mireva said nothing. From the black pine symbol at the end of the 7th trail, a new mark burned through the snow. Not a name. A wolf track. Deep, bloody, and fresh, pressed into the snow from the far side of the border. Rilla's face changed completely. Dacian saw it and went still. "What is there?" Rilla did not look at him. She was already running for the gate. Behind her, the exile knot on Dacian's palm tore open and wrote a third word in black fire. Shelter. Then the old black pine symbol split wider in the snow map. A woman's voice came through it, thin with distance and terror. "Rilla, they found us." The gate did not open for Rilla. It shuddered beneath the woman's distant cry, ironwood bars groaning in their black pine frame. But Packlaw remembered exile faster than mercy. The threshold flared silver when Rilla reached it. Cold fire struck her palms and threw her back a step. Beyond the yard, the old shelter mark pulsed in the snow map. "Rilla!" The woman's voice came again, thinner now. "Please." Every widow in the yard stopped breathing. Rilla pressed her burned hands against the gate again. The boundary bit deeper, cutting bright lines up her wrists where the exile knot had been. She did not pull away. "Open," she said. The gate did not. Mireva Holt's voice rang behind her. "The exile cannot cross under pack shelter. If she leaves unsheltered. If she returns, she violates judgment. That is law." "No," Rilla said through her teeth. "That is how you made rescue illegal." Dacian moved toward the gate. The death mark on his palm dragged black fire down his arm before he reached her. He caught himself against the exile stone, jaw tight, his wolf shadow surging ahead of him in fury. The mark did not want him to run. It wanted him to answer. Mireva saw it and lifted her chin. "Majesty, do not endanger the pack for a woman already severed. The border families are outside claim. Any shelter beyond the gate belongs to enemy consequence." Rilla turned. The gate wind cut fresh red lines across her cheek. She looked past Dacian, past the elders, past every face that had watched her knot cut. "That is what she sold," Rilla said. "Not only a road, a legal excuse to abandon whoever survived it." The snow map flashed. The old black pine symbol split wider. Through it came a blur of sound. Running feet, a woman's harsh breathing, wolves howling too close behind her. Not pack wolves, not clean howls. Hunt calls. The widows began to rise. Dacian's face hardened into something colder than rage. "Open the gate." The nearest gatekeeper swallowed. "Majesty, exile law. I know what I cut." That silenced the yard. Dacian lifted his marked palm. Black fire moved beneath the word shelter, waiting. "I cut her shelter before I asked where theirs was," he said. Each word forced into public air. "By my hand, pack law failed the lives still owed. By my blood, that failure opens before judgment closes." Mireva stepped forward sharply. "Majesty, do not speak blood." "Law without the seal ledger." Dacian looked at his cracked ring. "My seal is already in this." He drew the broken edge of the ring across his palm. Blood struck the debt mark. The gate did not open. Instead, the exile knot burned brighter, rejecting the blood like a wound rejecting false medicine. Dacian staggered, and a murmur of fear passed through the pack. Mireva's mouth curved. "Even the knot refuses him." "No," Rilla said. She saw it now. The mark had not rejected Dacian's blood because he was guilty. It rejected him because he was trying to pay a debt without naming the creditor. Rilla stepped back to the snow map. "Not to me," she said. Dacian looked at her. The shelter debt is not owed to me first. Her voice shook once, then steadied. Name them. The old widow made a sound behind her. Dacian understood. He turned to the bleeding record and read the names aloud, one by one. Sella Vor, Marin Holt, Brina Vale, Toman Grey, Ira Fen, Called Vor, Luma Hal. Each name struck the gate like a hand from the other side. Each name made the black pines bend lower. When he finished, the debt mark changed. Shelter opened across his palm like a burning door. The gate unlocked. Rilla did not wait for permission. She ran through first. The boundary still hurt, but it no longer tore. Dacian followed, not ahead of her, not carrying the rescue as if it were his to claim. His wolf shadow ran beside the path, holding back the silver edge of exile law, where it tried to close around Rilla's feet. Behind them, Mireva shouted, "If anyone crosses that gate, they defy council order." No one moved. Then the old widow stepped over the threshold. One warrior followed, then another. The pack did not rush. Shame made them slow, but they came. The snow map stretched beyond the gate, burning a black trail across the frozen ground. Rilla followed it through the outer pines, every breath tasting of sap, ash, and hunted fear. The shelter mark pulsed ahead, hidden beyond a fold of rock where old roots had grown over stone. A woman stumbled from between the pines. Her hair was loose, her cloak torn, one arm clutched to her side. Blood darkened the snow beneath her feet. She looked older than Rilla remembered, but her eyes were the same. Sella Vor. She fell before reaching the trail. Rilla caught her. The widow behind them cried out and tried to run, but Dacian lifted a hand, stopping her before grief threw her into danger. Rilla held Sella upright. "Where are the others?" Sella gripped Rilla's sleeve. "Inside. But the hunters have the lower path. They carried black root tokens. They knew the shelter mark." Dacian's eyes went to Mireva, still visible beyond the gate. Mireva stood perfectly still. Too still. Rilla looked down at Sella's hand. Something was clenched in her fist. Sella opened it. A black wax token lay in her palm, stamped with the cracked wolf head seal of the Alpha King. The debt mark on Dacian's hand burned so violently that every wolf beyond the gate lowered its head. Then the shelter mark ahead went dark, and from inside the hidden ravine, Brina Vale screamed. Brina Vale screamed once, then the ravine swallowed the sound. Rilla moved before the pack understood where the cry had come from. She slid Sella Vor into her mother's arms and ran toward the darkened shelter mark, following the black trail as it cut between pine roots and frozen stone. The old ravine opened ahead like a wound in the hillside, half hidden beneath thorn vines and snow-heavy branches. No fire burned inside. No shelter ward glowed. Whatever protection had held the families there had just been smothered. Dacian reached her side in 3 long strides. Rilla did not slow. "Tell your riders to stay behind me." His jaw tightened, but he turned. Behind Rilla, no one passes her command. The warriors stopped at once. Rilla heard the order. So did every widow, every elder, every wolf watching from the gate. The Alpha King had not said, "Follow me." He had said behind Rilla. It was not enough to heal what he had cut, but it changed the shape of the next breath. From the ravine came the scrape of boots on ice. Rilla dropped to one knee and pressed her fingers into the snow. Road ash, blood, wet iron, and beneath it, the bitter scent of black wax. "They are using your seal tokens as passage marks," she said. Dacian's marked hand closed around the token Sella had given him. The cracked wolf head stamp stared back from the wax like an accusation. "I never issued these," he said. Rilla looked up. "Your seal did." The words hit him hard, but he did not defend himself. That mattered more than a protest would have. A hunter stepped out from the ravine mouth. He wore no pack colors. His cloak was white-gray, cut for border snow. Around his neck hung 3 black wax tokens, stamped with the wolf head seal. In one hand, he held a hooked blade. In the other, a strip of torn shelter cloth marked with Brina Vale's blood. "By order of the Alpha Seal," the hunter called. "These fugitives are outside claim." Dacian's wolf shadow rose behind him with a sound that shook frost from the branches. The hunter flinched. Rilla did not. "Outside claim is not outside debt," she said. The exile mark on Dacian's palm answered, burning the word shelter brighter. Black fire ran from his hand into the snow, but it stopped at the ravine mouth, unable to enter. Mireva's voice rang from behind them. "Do not step inside. If the king crosses into an unsanctioned shelter under active exile debt, enemy law can claim provocation." Rilla turned just enough to see her beyond the gate, surrounded by elders who had not yet dared touch her. "You know that rule too quickly," Rilla said. Mireva's face stayed calm. "I know law. That is why the pack needs me." "No," Rilla said. "You know where to place fear so mercy looks illegal." The hunter lifted the hooked blade. From inside the ravine, someone whimpered. Rilla heard Brina then, not screaming now, but breathing through pain. Alive. Close. She stepped toward the hunter. Dacian caught her wrist. The boundary did not burn where he touched her. The exile knot on his palm flared between their skin. Not binding, not claiming. Warning. Rilla looked down at his hand, then at him. His voice was low. "If you walk in first, they will aim for you. They already are. Then let me stand between." "No." Her answer came fast and cold. "You stand where your seal cannot be used against me. If they say they act under your authority, then your authority stays outside and answers them." Dacian's face changed. Not anger. Recognition. He released her wrist. Then he lifted his marked palm toward the hunter. "Show the order." The hunter hesitated. Rilla moved during that hesitation. She threw the black wax token Sella had carried into the snow between them. The old shelter mark pulsed once beneath it. Not bright, not whole. "Enough. Shelter law," Rilla said. "Read the seal." The token cracked. A thin line of black fire rose from it and stretched toward the hunter's chest, where his own tokens hung. One by one, they began to melt. Wax ran down his cloak like dark blood, exposing the cords beneath. Not legal cords. Sale cords. Rilla's eyes narrowed. "You were not sent to retrieve fugitives." The cords burned red. The snow beneath the hunter's feet wrote one word. Bounty. The warriors behind Dacian growled. The hunter snarled and lunged at Rilla. Dacian moved, but Rilla was already lower than the blade. She swept snow into the hunter's eyes, stepped inside his reach, and drove her shoulder into his wounded side where old armor sat wrong beneath the cloak. He staggered. She caught the sail cords around his neck and yanked them down onto the shelter mark. Black fire swallowed the cords. The ravine entrance ignited, not with flame, but with names. Sellavor, Maren Holt, Brina Vale, Tommen Grey, Rilla Thane, Caldvor, Luma Hal. The hidden family's names burned across the thorn vines, and the smothered shelter ward woke. Inside the ravine, more hunters, cursed. Dacian lifted his hand. "Take them alive." Rilla turned sharply. He corrected himself before she spoke. Under Rilla's command, the warriors surged past him only when Rilla nodded. The fight was brief and ugly. Hunters tried to flee through the lower path, but the awakened shelter ward bent the thorns inward, trapping their cloaks and blades. Rilla entered the ravine first. She found Brina Vale against the inner wall, pale with fever, one hand pressed to her side, the other clutching a bundle of torn oath paper. Brina looked past Rilla and saw Dacian at the ravine mouth. Her eyes filled with anger before relief could reach them. "Your seal opened the road to them," she whispered. Dacian stood still beneath the words. Rilla knelt beside Brina. "What paper is that?" Brina's fingers shook as she opened the bundle. Inside was a strip from the missing seal ledger, torn but readable, marked with the Alpha King's wolf head stamp and Miriver Holt's witness sign. Across the bottom, in black oath ink, one line remained whole: transfer of border protection rights, approved to beta consort Miriver Holt. The ravine went silent. Then the shelter ward above them changed. The 7 rescued names vanished from the thorns. In their place, a new sentence burned across the frozen stone. The debt is older than the raid. Brina Vale hid the torn oath paper against her chest before Dacian could reach for it. The gesture was small, but every wolf in the ravine saw it. A wounded woman of the Alpha King's own bloodline trusted Rilla Thane before she trusted the hand that wore the crown seal. Dacian stopped where he stood. No anger crossed his face. That made the pause heavier. He had come to rescue them, but rescue did not erase the fact that his mark had opened the road to hunters first. Rilla held out her hand to Brina. "May I read it?" Brina looked at her, then gave her the paper. The strip was brittle with old oath ink. Dacian's wolf head seal had been pressed deep into black wax at the top. Beneath it, Miriver Holt's witness sign curved in red. The surviving line at the bottom stayed black and whole. Transfer of border protection rights approved to beta consort Miriver Holt. Rilla turned the strip toward the weak shelter light. "There is a date under the wax." Dacian stepped closer. No one bowed. Not Celavor. Not Tommen Grey leaning against a root with his broken leg bound in cloak strips. Not Rilla Thane sitting near the inner wall with one hand over her stomach. The rescued families watched him as if waiting to see whether a king could read what his seal had done. Rilla scraped the edge of black wax with her thumbnail. The hidden date appeared. Before the raid. Before the shelters emptied. Before Rilla had ever been accused. Dacian's face changed. "This was signed in the first month after my crowning." Brina's voice was raw. "That was when patrols stopped coming," Tommen Grey said. "That was when grain stopped reaching the lower shelters." Rilla Thane lifted her chin. "That was when Miriver's riders told us the Crown Road was safer than old pine paths." The ravine went still. Then Miriver Holt spoke from the entrance. And it was legal. She stood beyond the awakened thorns with 4 elders behind her and 2 guards at either side. Snow clung to the hem of her red gown. Her face carried no panic now, only the calm of someone who had found the law she meant to hide behind. "The border was failing," Miriver said. "His Majesty approved transfer of protection rights, so I could reorganize routes, tithes, and patrol access. Do not let an exile twist governance into treason." Rilla held up the oath paper. "Protection rights are not ownership of lives." "No," Miriver said. "But they are authority over movement. Every family in this ravine left assigned ground under your guidance. That makes you the one who broke the transfer." The trap closed around the air. Rilla felt it. Dacian did too. Miriver was not denying the document. She was using it. If protection rights had been transferred to her, then every family Rilla moved off the sold road could be named stolen from lawful custody. "You sold their road," Rilla said. "I managed their risk. You sent hunters after them. I sent recovery men after fugitives." Dacian's voice cut through the ravine. "Enough." Rilla turned to him with perfect sorrow. "Majesty, you signed the first transfer. If you condemn me without ledger trial, you condemn your own crown." The rescued families looked at him. So did Rilla. This was the place where a weaker king would ask for time. A crueler one would bury the paper. Dacian looked at the torn strip, then at the debt mark burning through his palm. "I signed a transfer I did not read deeply enough," he said. "I gave authority over shelter to a hand I did not test." Miriver's expression tightened. It was not absolution. Rilla would not give him that. But it mattered that he said it while the people harmed by the paper could hear. Rilla turned to the families. "Does anyone here deny that I moved you from Crown Road because the shelters were empty and enemy scouts waited there?" Tommen Grey pushed himself straighter. "She carried me," Celavor said. "She burned her map so no one could follow us." Rilla Thane said. "She gave me her coat, and slept against the snow. Brina looked at Dacian last. She told us not to curse the pack. She said the pack had not seen the record. Rilla looked away. That almost hurt more than exile. Dacian lowered his head to the rescued families. Then the pack will see it now. Mireva stepped through the first layer of thorns. They did not cut her. The old transfer still recognized her. Bring them back to the yard, she ordered. They will be counted, questioned, and reassigned under my protection. The families recoiled. Rilla stepped between them and Mireva. No. Mireva smiled. You are still exiled. Rilla lifted the torn oath paper. Then let the exile answer what the crown cannot. She pressed her thumb to the place where her name had never been written. Blood rose from the old rope cuts on her wrist and fell onto the transfer line. The ravine went silent. The exile knot on Dacian's palm tore open in answer, sending black fire across the snow to Rilla's blood. The two flames met over the oath paper. For the first time, the law wrote beneath Rilla's hand. Border Guardian may challenge transfer if she paid shelter in flesh. Mireva's face changed. Rilla looked up. There it is. The thorns bent toward her. Dacian stared at the words, and something dangerous and reverent moved through his expression. Not love. Not yet. Recognition. The kind that came too late and still had to kneel before truth. What is the challenge? He asked. Rilla looked at the rescued families. Then, at the old black pine symbol burning above the ravine. Name every shelter that lost protection under Mireva's transfer. The frozen stone behind them cracked from root to root. Not 7 names burned there. Dozens. Then the shelter ward dragged black fire across the ravine wall and wrote one final command. First transfer witness must speak before the debt can be tried. Dacian's cracked seal ring burned white. Mireva smiled slowly, and the oath paper in Rilla's hand began to write the witness name in the Alpha King's blood. An elder lifted his counting staff, and the thorns snapped it in half. The sound cracked through the ravine like a bone breaking. The old man stumbled back, staring at the splintered wood in his hand. No one had touched him. No wolf had lunged. The shelter ward had simply decided that no one would be counted like property while the transfer debt remained awake. Mireva Holt did not flinch. That was how Rilla knew the next trap had already been set. The beta consort stood beneath the dark mouth of the ravine, red gown bright against the snow, her expression calm enough to frighten the rescued families more than rage would have. Behind her, the elders shifted uneasily. Behind them, pack warriors filled the path, torn between a king marked by debt and a law that still recognized Mireva's transfer. Dacian looked at the blood-written name on the oath paper in Rilla's hand. Dacian Morrow. No one spoke it aloud. They did not need to. Mireva folded her hands. The first witness is the king. The debt cannot be tried unless he confirms the transfer stood under lawful authority. Rilla felt the old pattern closing again. Not denial. Worse. A truth bent until it became a cage. Dacian's face was rigid. I do not remember witnessing this. Memory is not the measure of a royal seal, Mireva said. Law is. Rilla turned the paper toward him. Were you present when this was made? His answer did not come quickly. That mattered. The rescued families watched him from the shadows. Brina Vale pale against the wall, Selavor holding her mother's sleeve, Rilla Thane with one hand over her stomach, Toman Grey gripping a root to keep weight off his broken leg. They had lived for weeks inside the consequence of a signature the king could not remember. Dacian opened his burned hand. The debt mark crawled beneath his skin. I was crowned after the Eastern War, he said. For 12 nights, I carried silver fever from a wound meant to kill my wolf. Mireva handled seal petitions while I could not stand. Mireva's eyes sharpened. Careful, Majesty. Grief makes exiles inventive, but weakness makes kings vulnerable. Dacian looked at her. Did I witness this transfer with my own hand? You gave me authority to preserve the border. That is not what I asked. The ravine tightened around the silence. Rilla saw Mireva's thumb brush the mourning beads in her braid. Another signal, perhaps. Another hidden weapon. Rilla moved before the bead could crack. She stepped close enough to make Mireva look at her instead of Dacian. Swear by the shelter names that he was awake. Mireva's smile thinned. I do not swear to the exiled. No, Rilla said. You swear to the people you claimed authority over. The thorns bent inward. For the first time, Mireva stepped back. There. Fear, not of Dacian, not of the elders, of the shelter itself hearing the right question. Dacian saw it too. Swear, he said. Mireva lifted her chin. Very well. I swear the crown authorized me. That was not the oath, Rilla said. Black fire flickered along the ravine wall. The ward had heard the evasion. Brina Vale pushed herself upright with a hiss of pain. Ask who held his hand. Mireva's eyes flashed. Rilla turned to Brina. What? Brina swallowed. When the fever petitions came through, they said the king's hand still had to touch the seal, even if he could not speak, even if another guided it. Dacian went still. The rescued families seemed to pull away from the fact before it fully formed. Rilla looked at the oath paper again. The blood-written name glowed beneath the transfer line, but now another mark surfaced beside it. Not a signature, not a witness line, but the faint shape of pressure. Fingers over fingers. Mireva moved, not toward Rilla, toward Rilla Thane. A small blade slid from inside Mireva's sleeve, so thin it looked like a hairpin until the edge caught light. She seized Rilla by the shoulder and pressed the blade beneath her jaw before any warrior could cross the thorns. Enough, Mireva said. The ravine froze. Rilla did not scream. Her face went white, but her hand stayed over her stomach. Mireva's voice lost its softness. You want witnesses? Here is one. If the transfer is broken, every family under it becomes disputed property between crown and border enemies. I can still claim emergency custody before the debt trial. One cut, and this ravine becomes a blood matter no exile can challenge. Dacian's wolf shadow surged. Rilla lifted one hand. Stop. Dacian stopped. The word cost him. She saw it in his face. But if he lunged, Mireva would cut Rilla and call it proof that Rilla's shelter challenge caused blood. Rilla took one step forward. Mireva pressed the blade closer. Do not. Rilla stopped. You are not afraid of the debt trial. Mireva laughed once. I am afraid of fools who think mercy feeds a border. No. Rilla's eyes dropped to Mireva's hand. The blade trembled only when Ira's blood touched it. You are afraid of a living witness speaking before the king does. The thorns answered with a low, scraping sound. Mireva's face changed. Rilla knew then. The first witness did not have to be Dacian. The first witness had to be the first person harmed under the transfer. Rilla turned to Rilla. Did you lose shelter before the raid? Ira's lips shook. Mireva hissed. Do not answer. Dacian's voice cut through the ravine, low and lethal. If you cut her, Mireva, no law in this pack will keep you breathing. Mireva smiled with her teeth. And there is the beast behind the crown. Rilla did not look at him. Rilla, speak to the shelter, not to her. Rilla closed her eyes. The lower shelter lost grain first, she whispered. Then patrol. Then medicine. We begged the transfer office. Mireva's riders told us protection could be restored if we paid passage. The ravine wall burned. First harm witness recognized. Mireva's bladder shook. Rilla moved fast. She caught Mireva's wrist with both hands and drove it down onto the oath paper. Not to cut her, not to punish, to make the law touch the hand that had hidden behind seals. Black fire leapt. Mireva screamed. The blade fell. Dacian crossed the distance and pulled Rilla behind him, not claiming command, only removing her from the edge of death. His wolf shadow covered the wounded families, wide and silent. The oath paper curled in Rilla's hand. A new line wrote itself beneath Dacian's name. Royal witness hand guided during silver fever. Then another, guiding hand required. Mireva tried to tear free. Rilla held on. The shelter ward dragged black fire up Mireva's sleeve, and under the burned cloth, a second seal ring appeared on her finger, shaped like Dacian's wolf head, and stained with old silver fever blood. Rilla Thane spat blood onto the snow and stayed standing. Her knees shook. One hand braced over her stomach, but she did not let the nearest warrior carry her. The thin cut at her throat was not deep. Mireva had wanted fear, not death. Fear was cleaner. Fear made witnesses easier to move. Rilla kept Mireva's wrist pinned over the oath paper. The old silver fever blood on the hidden ring had begun to wake. It did not glow like the Exile Knot. It sweated through the metal in dark beads, each one falling onto the paper with a soft hiss. Wherever the blood touched, a memory surfaced. A sick room lit by blue fire, Dacian half-conscious beneath fever furs, his right hand limp on the seal table, Mireva standing beside him with calm eyes and a second wolf head ring fitted over her own finger. The rescued families saw it. So did Dacian. He did not speak for a long moment. That silence was not weakness. It was the shape of a man finally seeing how his authority had been used while his body could not defend it. Mireva twisted against Rilla's grip. A regent consort may guide a fevered king's hand in emergency matters. Rilla looked at the memory. Not while buying shelter rights from the people who needed them. I preserved the border. You priced it. The shelter ward struck the ravine wall with black fire. Price record required. Mireva went still. Rilla felt the change before she understood it. The law was no longer asking who had signed. It was asking what had been paid. That frightened Mireva more than the forged witness. Dacian stepped closer, but not between them. Where is the price record? Mireva smiled through pain. In the Oath Archive. Sealed under council protection. You cannot open it here. Rilla's eyes narrowed. There it was again. The place power always ran when truth came too near. Not denial, but procedure. She looked at the rescued families. Who paid? No one answered at first. Then Tommen Grey shifted on his broken leg. We did. Selavor's mother clutched her daughter harder. Brina Vale lowered her eyes. Rilla's voice softened. With what? Rilla Thane lifted her chin. Grain first. The wall wrote. Grain. Tommen said. Winter hides. Ids. Sella's voice broke. Medicine. Medicine. Brina Vale looked at Dacian. Names. The ravine went colder. Rilla turned. What do you mean? Brina swallowed. Families who could not pay gave names for route service. Sons, daughters, cousins. Anyone old enough to carry messages across border snow. Mireva called it temporary duty. Mireva's face sharpened. Every border survives by service. Brina's eyes filled with hatred. They never came back. The wall burned again. Price record accepted. A line of black fire shot from the ravine toward the black pine oath yard beyond the gate. Mireva lunged with her free hand toward another mourning bead. Dacian caught her wrist. This time, the Exile Knot did not flare at him for touching her. It tightened around his palm, like a command finally aligned with the debt. No more signals, he said. Mireva laughed softly. You think stopping me stops what I built? The roots answer seals, Majesty. Yours, mine, the Council's. Every hunter carrying a token knows where to go if I do not return. Rilla's blood went cold. Dacian's wolf shadow spread over the ravine mouth, blocking the path back to the yard. Then we end the tokens. Mireva looked at him with pity. You cannot. They were purchased under royal transfer. Only the first harmed witness can void them. And she is not crown. Rilla looked at Ira. Ira's face went pale. Mireva had chosen her hostage carefully. Not only because she was vulnerable, because she was first harm witness. If Ira died, the challenge weakened. If Ira lived afraid, the tokens held. Rilla released Mireva's wrist. Dacian's gaze snapped to her. Mireva smiled. Then Rilla knelt before Rilla Thane. Not as a servant, not as an exile, as the border guardian who had carried their names when no record would. "Do you give me leave to speak your harm into pack law?" Rilla asked. Ira stared at her. "You are asking?" "Yes." The word moved through the ravine quietly, but it changed everything. Mireva had taken authority. Dacian had failed to question it. Rilla asked. Ira's hand shook as she touched the cut at her throat, then placed her bloodied fingers on Rilla's wrist. "I give leave." The shelter ward bowed inward. Rilla stood and pressed Ira's blood to the hidden second ring on Mireva's finger. Mireva screamed before the law even wrote. The ring cracked. Not open. Not broken. Exposed. Inside the wolf head stamp, beneath Dacian's stolen seal mark, another mark appeared. A narrow thorn crown used by the enemy border houses. The warriors snarled. Dacian's voice dropped. "You sold our shelter routes to enemy houses." Mireva's composure shattered for one breath, then rebuilt itself colder. "I sold passage rights. I bought peace. You bought silence," Rilla said. The cracked ring answered. Every black wax token taken from the hunters began to smoke. One by one, the tokens lifted from belts, pouches, and dead snow, spinning toward the ravine wall. Names burned across them, not families this time, but buyers, enemy houses, council hands, pack merchants, and one title that made even Dacian's wolf shadow go still. Oath Archive Keeper. Rilla turned toward the yard. The old archive beneath the black pine was not safe. It had never been safe. If the keeper had sold records, then the seal ledger Dacian had ordered opened might already be burning. Mireva saw the realization and smiled through blood. "Too late," she whispered. From the oath yard came a deep crack, like frozen stone splitting under a hidden fire. Black ash rose beyond the pines. Then the Exile Knot on Dacian's palm wrote a fourth word. Archive. Rilla was already running. The oldest widow reached the oath yard before the warriors, because grief had no armor to slow it. She crossed the gate with Sella clinging to her arm and stopped beneath the black pine just as smoke began to pour from the oath archive. Not grey smoke. Black, thick with burned ink, old wax, and the bitter stink of records that had been waiting too long to die. Rilla came through the gate a breath later. The archive door stood open. Inside, shelves of seal ledgers burned without flame. Parchment curled in the dark, eaten by silent black fire that moved from spine to spine like a hand, choosing what history no longer needed to confess. The Oath Archive Keeper stood at the center of it all, a thin old man in ash-colored robes, holding a bronze oil lamp over the main seal ledger. He saw Rilla first, then Dacian behind her. His hand shook. "Stop," Dacian said. The keeper dropped the lamp. Rilla lunged. She did not try to catch the fire. She caught the ledger. The lamp shattered against the stone, spilling pale oil across the archive floor. Black flames rose around her boots. The boundary of exile bit at once, punishing her for entering a pack record chamber after her shelter had been cut. Pain climbed her legs like winter teeth. Dacian stepped toward her. "No," Rilla snapped. "Protect the witnesses." He stopped. It was the right answer. It cost him to obey it. He turned back and placed himself between the rescued families and the burning archive. His wolf shadow spread wide, not over Rilla, not to claim her rescue, but over Sella, Brina, Ira, Toman, Cold, Luma, and Marin as they stumbled through the gate with warriors around them. Mireva Holt entered the yard last. She looked at the smoke, then at the ledger in Rilla's arms. For the first time, her calm cracked. "Destroy that," she ordered the keeper. The old man dropped to his knees. "My lady." "I tried." The yard heard him. Mireva went still. Dacian turned slowly. "My lady?" Rilla carried the ledger out of the archive. Its cover had burned away, but the inner pages remained bound by black pine roots grown through the spine. The Exile Knot on Dacian's palm flared with the fourth word, Archive. Then the letters sank into his skin and pulled his hand toward the ledger. Rilla stepped back. "Do not touch it yet." Dacian's jaw tightened. "Why?" "Because every time your seal touches a record before witnesses speak, someone else uses your authority to bury them." The sentence landed in the yard harder than blame. Dacian lowered his hand. Mireva recovered enough to laugh. "Listen to her. The exile now commands the king not to touch his own ledger." "No," Dacian said. "She reminds him why he should have waited." Silence fell. Rilla opened the ledger on the exile stone. The pages did not show ink. They showed ash impressions. Places where records had been cut out, names scraped away, roots rewritten. The archive had not saved the truth in words. It had saved the shape of erasure. Rilla pressed her burned wrist above the first ash mark. "Border Guardian Rilla Thane," she said. "Challenging transfer debt by shelter paid in flesh." The ledger answered. Names rose from the ash. Not 7, dozens. Families from lower shelters. Winter patrols reassigned to empty roads. Medicine stores transferred to Mireva's private root houses. Protection tolls recorded under emergency authority. Each page turned by itself, and each one carried Dacian's seal. The pack stared. Mireva pointed at him before anyone else could. His seal, his reign, his debt. Dacian looked at the pages, then at the rescued families. "Yes," he said. Mireva's smile faltered. Dacian lifted his cracked ring for the whole yard to see. "My seal carried this. My silence allowed it. My hand cut the woman who kept alive the people my crown failed to protect." The black pine branches bent low. Rilla did not look at him. If she did, some weaker part of her might soften before the law was finished. She would not let his guilt become the center of the trial. The rescued families had waited too long to be background to a king's regret. She turned another page. The ledger stopped resisting. A hidden pocket opened inside the spine, and a strip of dark cord slid out. Rilla knew it before it touched the stone. An exile knot. Not hers. A prepared one. Unused. Blackened at the ends. Braided with root ash and crown wax. The widow behind her whispered, "Whose?" The ledger wrote beneath it, "Prepared before border trial." Rilla's breath left her. Mireva had not reacted to the family's disappearance by demanding exile. She had prepared exile before the accusation ever reached council. Before Rilla returned. Before the pack heard a single charge. Dacian's face went pale. Rilla lifted the unused knot with 2 fingers. "You planned to cut me before you knew who survived." Mireva's eyes hardened into something bare and cruel. "You were always going to be a problem." There it was. Not law, not grief. Truth, stripped of velvet. Rilla stepped down from the exile stone and walked toward Mireva. The pack moved with her. Not forward, not yet, but inward. Closing the space that had protected Mireva for too long. Mireva reached for the final mourning bead in her braid. Dacian caught her wrist. This time, he did not look to Rilla for permission. Not because he was taking command from her, but because this danger was his to stop. "No more signals," he said. Mireva smiled. "You are late, Majesty." The bead in her braid cracked without her touching it. Far beyond the yard, an answering horn sounded from the northern ridge. Rilla turned toward the gate. The snow map still burned there. But now, every root darkened at once. The seal ledger slammed shut beneath her hand. Across its charred cover, black fire wrote the final trial command. "All shelter debt returns to the black pine oath yard." Then the ground beneath the yard shook. From beyond the gate came the thunder of many paws. Not pack wolves, hired ones, and they were running toward the rescued families. Mireva laughed before the pack saw the northern ridge move. It was not loud. It did not need to be. The sound slipped through the black pine oath yard with all the confidence of someone who had not placed her last hope in words, but in teeth. Rilla turned from the seal ledger. The rescued families stood near the exile stone, too weak to run and too visible to hide. Widows closed around them with bodies, shawls, and shaking hands, as if grief could become a wall. Warriors drew blades along the yard's outer ring. The black pines bent under a wind that carried no snow now, only the iron smell of foreign wolves coming fast. Dacian stepped toward the gate. Rilla caught his arm. "Not first," she said. His head turned sharply. "They are coming for the families. They are coming under your seal." That stopped him harder than force could have. Beyond the gate, the first hired wolf broke from the trees. He was shifted but wrong. His grey fur marked with black wax tokens tied along his throat. Behind him came more. Lean border wolves with iron collars, sail cords, and the same stamped proof Mireva had used to make murder look like legal recovery. Dacian's wolf shadow rose behind him, huge and furious. Rilla held his arm tighter. "If you kill them before the law reads them, Mireva will call them invaders and bury the purchase." Mireva's smile thinned. There. The truth. She had expected rage from him. A king's rage made such useful fire. Rilla released Dacian and stepped onto the exile stone. The pack gasped. The stone should have rejected her. It should have burned through her feet and thrown her outside the gate. Instead, the exile knot on Dacian's palm flared across the yard and wrapped black fire around the stone like a witness taking its seat. Mireva snapped. "She has no shelter right." Rilla looked at the hired wolves pouring toward the gate. "No, I have debt right." The seal ledger opened beneath her hand. Its burned pages turned in a storm of ash. Each black wax token on the hired wolves' throats answered, glowing one by one as they crossed the threshold. The wolves faltered. The first beast lunged anyway, jaws wide for the nearest rescued family. Rilla raised the unused exile knot Mireva had prepared for her. "Read the route," she commanded. The knot unraveled in her hands. Not into cord, into black fire lines. They shot across the snow and caught the tokens at every hired throat. Wolves crashed to the ground, snarling as the fire dragged their purchase marks into open air. Names burned above them. Enemy houses, border brokers, pack merchants, council hands. Then the ledger wrote the line Mireva had tried to kill. Recovery hunters bought under transfer of protection rights. The warriors turned on Mireva. She stepped back. "I bought peace." Rilla's voice cut through the yard. "You bought a hunt." Dacian walked to the exile stone then, slowly enough that every witness saw he did not lead the law. He came to answer it. Blood still marked his palm. The cracked seal ring hung broken on his finger. "Mireva Holt," he said. "By my seal and before the Black Pine Oath Yard, did you sell shelter routes, purchase hunters, and prepare exile before trial?" Mireva lifted her chin. "I did what the border required." The ledger answered. Confession accepted. Her face changed. The hired wolves went still. Dacian looked at the rescued families. "The sentence is not mine alone." Mireva's eyes widened. "Majesty." "No," he said. "Not this time." He turned to Rilla. For one breath, the yard waited for the king to give her justice, as if it were a gift from his hand. Rilla did not take that shape. She stepped down from the exile stone and faced the rescued families. "You were sold under protection law. You were hunted under protection law. You speak first." Selavor's mother lifted her trembling hand. Brina Vale stood beside her, pale but upright. Rilla Thane, Toman Grey, Cold Vor, Luma Hal, Marin Holt, all 7 names the pack had buried as missing, stood before the woman who had priced their shelter. One by one, they spoke. "Name us living. Void the transfer. Return the shelters. Burn the tokens. Try the council hands. Mark every road she sold. And let no exile be cut before the missing are named." The black pines shook. The exile knot burned brighter than the torches. Dacian bowed his head. "Granted." Rilla turned to him. "Not granted." "Recorded." The correction struck him. Then he nodded. "Recorded." He pressed his bleeding palm to the seal ledger, not to command it, but to bind himself beneath it. By my crown, every border shelter removed under Meriva Holt's transfer is restored. Every root sale is void. Every council hand named in the tokens is held for public trial. Every family here stands under pack protection before my own house takes fire or meat. The ledger accepted the words. Then Rilla placed the unused Exile Knot on top of Mireva's record. Beta, consort Meriva Holt, she said. You prepared exile before trial. You cut shelter from the living to protect your sale. Let the knot answer you. Mireva stepped back, but the cord moved faster. It wrapped around her wrist. She screamed when it tightened. No blood came. No blade fell. The knot simply drank every false shelter she had claimed. Her red gown darkened. Her mourning beads cracked one by one and spilled root ash into the snow. The title Better Consort burned away from the ledger. Then protection holder. Then border regent. Then witness. What remained wrote itself in black law. Mireva Holt. Shelter seller. Oath debtor. The hired wolves lowered their heads, not to her, to the rescued families. Dacian looked at Rilla, and the whole yard saw him hesitate before speaking. That hesitation mattered. He had learned that not every wound wanted a king's hand near it. Rilla Thane, he said, I cut your knot before I named the living. I cannot ask you back under the shelter I broke. No, Rilla said. You cannot. The words hurt him. He let them. The exile knot on his palm loosened, but did not fade. Rilla looked at the rescued families, then at the widows, then at the black pines that had bent away from him at the start. Restore the shelters first. Try the council hands. Put the missing names into pack law where no consort, king, or elder can remove them without public witness. Dacian bowed his head. And after? Rilla held his gaze. After, I decide whether black pine is worthy of my return. A faint sound moved through the yard. Not outrage, not relief. Respect, uncertain, and new. Dacian stepped aside, not away from her. Aside. The gate behind him opened fully, no longer silver with exile fire. The black pines bent inward now, not toward the king, but toward the woman who had carried shelter beyond the law and brought the living back to stand inside it. Rilla walked through the yard past him, not exiled, not restored by mercy, but witnessed. Behind her, the seal ledger wrote the 7 rescued names into black pine law, and this time, no one dared look away.